with all your business headlines.
Thank you very much, Karen. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Farmers in South Africa are pleading for financial assistance in order to cope with the effects of a nasty drought. And unions in Nigeria have rejected the government's new minimum wage offer of $75. So where do they go from here? We'll have some answers for you in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Karen.
Thank you very much, Rama. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is in India. He arrived on Friday for talks with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Talks between the two leaders are expected to touch an array of issues, but will focus specifically on higher education and training, arts and culture, home affairs, as well as defence and energy. India is one of South Africa's top trading partners, with bilateral trade of $10 billion last year. On Saturday, Ramaphosa will be the guest of honour at India's Republic Day Parade.
This is a historic visit for us as South Africans, because we're here not only to consolidate the relationship between India and South Africa, but also to remember the great leaders that our two countries have had, Gandhi and Mandela.
Well, to get more on this, we are now joined by Angelo Coppola in Johannesburg in South Africa for us. South Africa and India today signed a 3-year strategic program of cooperation. What are the details of the program and how important is it for the two countries?
Well, Karen, all we know so far is that the two leaders have instructed their ministers to begin implementation of this program. The official communique following the signing ceremony earlier discusses a range of related issues. However, Ramaphosa did say that while India is South Africa's second largest trading partner in Asia, that's after China, there was a number of areas of future cooperation, and they included agro-processed goods, mining equipment, and technology cooperation, as well as some work in the financial services sector. And of course, then there's that procurement in the defense sector that you mentioned earlier. You'll recall that there was also talk at some point of a possible deal involving the Indian government looking at an equity stake in the South African arms manufacturer Denel. That talk at the time, that was late in November, was dismissed, but there seem to be some plans in the offing here, because we understand that one of the senior executives for Denel is actually on this junket. So we could see some developments on that front. In terms of the overall program, this appears to be an important deal for both sides, Karen.
And Angelo, how is this program going to work and when will it start?
Well, look, the ministerial teams have been working hard in the background before the actual signing ceremony, as you know how these things work. But details are a little sketchy at the moment. The program was signed a couple of hours ago, but I did get the feeling that there was a sense of urgency to get the ball rolling. Ramaphosa says that the program is aimed at deepening this so-called bilateral engagement between the two countries, and also ensuring that it's a results-oriented partnership that benefits the people on both countries, or in both countries. So the visit wasn't about signing new agreements, but actioning those existing deals that have already been done. Deals that were done in 2018 and deals done and negotiations done in 2017. So the time for talking appears to be over, and it's now time to get on with some action. Details on the priorities are likely to be released by the South African Department of Trade and Industry. That's via Rob Davies and his counterpart in India. Karen?
And finally, Angelo, how important is India to South Africa? And with regard to the world economy, how important is this relationship?
Well, look, as you've mentioned, India is South Africa's top 5 trading partner there. In 2018, that bilateral trade did increase, but only marginally. You mentioned the figure of 10.6 odd billion. That was up marginally from 9.38 billion in 2017. The economic partnership, I'm told, is robust. There are some 150 Indian companies operating in South Africa. They've invested around $700 million here. They employ around 20,000 people. We don't know what the similar detail is of South African companies in India, but we understand it's starting to pick up. So it's not big in terms of the global scale of first world countries, but it's significant for South Africa, specifically with our massive unemployment problem and the stagnant economy. So we can use all the help we can get, Karen.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was Angelo Coppola there in Johannesburg in South Africa. Moving on to other news now. Rival groups from the Central African Republic are in the Sudanese capital Khartoum for peace talks. Representatives of 14 armed groups are meeting government representatives. The gathering is organised by the African Union. Among the issues on the agenda are security, governance, power sharing, reintegration and the demobilisation of armed factions. Well, the CAR has been plagued by religious and ethnic conflict since 2013. Hundreds have been killed and displaced in the Central African nation. The United Nations and Sudan say that they are optimistic about the talks as the parties have shown willingness to move forward with the peace process.
We have been working with our brothers on both sides of the CAR to resolve the conflict, and there is willingness to end the unrest and move forward with the country. We hold great hopes in our brothers to reach a comprehensive peace agreement that will end the country's suffering.
2019 doit être.
We hope that 2019 will be the year of peace in the Central African Republic. We at the United Nations and the Security Council support efforts to achieve comprehensive peace. The United Nations supports the efforts of the African Union and all international parties. We also support the efforts of Central Africa and the parties involved in the peace process, especially the Central African community and the international community in general.
Well, earlier we spoke to Dr. Francis Onditi. He is the head of the School of International Relations and Diplomacy at Riara University here in Kenya. He gave some insight into the Central African Republic peace talks that are currently taking place in Khartoum.
This is a country that is controlled by, almost 70% of the country is controlled by militias. That is the Seleka and the anti-Balak. So we can say yes, I think this time around the peace talk has been organized a little bit different from the 2013. One of the mistakes that was done in 2013 was to allow the regional leaders under the umbrella of ECAS to take the lead, but then the Seleka and the anti-Balak groups were left out. So then the peace talk never lasted even a week. As soon as they finished signing the peace talk, people were on the street in Bangui fighting and killing each other. But this time around, I think they have made it to bring most of the groups together. But I think the main challenge they're likely to have is how to ensure that the warring groups, particularly the anti-Balaka and the Seleka, they define their need from a political perspective. Because in most cases, they lacked what we call a political objective. And that becomes very hard in diplomacy, or rather in negotiation, to agree or disagree to agree on what they really need. Because they have no idea what they need. Most of the time, they want to say, okay, we are going to fight because these Christians have burned our mosque, or the Muslims are saying that Christians have killed our people. So they don't have really a political agenda. But the task that the UN, the AU, and the ECAS have in bringing these two groups together is, one, making sure that both groups have a political agenda, but secondly, they agree that they'll have to establish what we call a monitoring, a monitoring mechanism. And they have to make sure that they have what we call a kind of a steward who is going to overlook to oversee the monitoring mechanism to ensure that both sides are agreeing to the political agenda that they're going to set up in Khartoum.
Egypt's army, backed by the police, is beefing up security nationwide ahead of the 8th anniversary of the January the 25th revolution that saw longtime ruler Hosni Mubarak removed. The army says military forces will be deployed to secure vital sites and major roads. There are no official celebrations to mark the 18-day turmoil of 2011, but the country is using the opportunity to take stock of strides made so far. Here's Adel El-Mahrouki with more.
Back in 2011, Tahrir Square has been the focal point of unprecedented wave of protests in Egypt's modern history. Tens of thousands took the streets demanding change, most of them youth. Ala Assam is one of those who've excitedly joined the protests as popular move against President Hosni Mubarak was getting bigger. During that time, Ala was leading the marches of his socialist political party, Al-Tagammu.
We still need to work on social justice and economic empowerment. We need to invest in production to increase domestic components in products. We must move Egypt away from the dependency of the one-man rule to a state with institutions, to have strong legislative, judicial and civil entities that run the country.
25th of January is Egypt's Police Day. It commemorates 50 policemen who died and got injured in 1952, refusing to drop their weapons against the British Army. In 2011, the protests broke in objections to police abuses against citizens.
The Constitution confirms that January 25th was a revolution. And when we saw the President this week mention it during the Police Day celebrations, this means we've passed the stage of hard feelings. In 2011, we clashed with the police, then the police sacrificed their lives for us. Then we turned to protecting the police stations when they were under attack. The police now take major civil roles. They pay from their own salaries, which is not much, to support the poor.
8 years have passed and Egypt is still struggling to bring back its economy to pre-2011 status. Cairo is clearly in political stability, but there is a war against terrorism that is still far from being over. So much has been achieved, still many hope for more. The youth who've sparked the January uprising have been divided. Many have been imprisoned as they continued their opposition. Few like Ala are still into politics, and some have made it all the way to parliament to shape the country's future.
8 years onward, Tahrir Square remains a landmark visited by many Egyptians and a memorial of the hardships they went through in their pursuit for change. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, from Al Tahrir Square in Cairo.
We are going to a short break now, don't go away. Lots more to come, including... In South Africa, farmers in need of about $220 million to survive tough conditions. And in South Sudan, AU body urges parties to prioritise unification of armed forces.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowd in Cairo,
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
My home country lies at the foot of Africa, the southernmost tip of our beautiful continent and the unique point at which two great oceans meet. Now on a clear day in Cape Town, you can just make out Robben Island, a place where Nelson Mandela was jailed for so long. South Africa has changed so much in the years since then, but it is this country's history that shaped me and took me into reporting. I'm inspired by Africa's men and women of courage. It's the everyday hero who brings out my passion. The creatives, the decision makers, the risk takers who are shaping a bright African future. I see them in Cape Town. I see them in the pulsating city of Johannesburg. I see them across the continent, and I know our time has come.
CGTN is a platform where African voices can speak for themselves and take their stories to the world. My name is Lindy Mtongana, and I'm a news anchor and reporter for CGTN. Africa Live. Find your voice.
President Muhammadu Buhari has suspended Walter Onnoghen and appointed Justice Ibrahim Tanko Muhammad Yusuf as the acting Chief Justice. This comes a day after the Court of Appeal ruled against the trial of Justice Onnoghen in the Code of Conduct Tribunal. His media aide said the suspension is based on advice from the Code of Conduct Court. The suspended Chief Justice has been asked to appear before a tribunal over allegations of breaching an assets declaration rule. Back in South Africa, farmers are warning of a crisis brewing as persistent dryness and hot weather threaten crops and livestock. This comes just 3 years after the country grappled with the worst drought on record. The farming community says it needs almost 3 billion rand to support farmers amid the drought. CGTN's Yolisa Njumela has more.
A recent survey conducted by Grain SA and Agri SA to assess drought conditions in South Africa paints a bleak picture. The survey shows that out of 278 municipalities in this country, 173 are affected by drought conditions. The survey also indicates that since January 2018, more than 7 billion rand in production value had been lost due to ongoing drought conditions. Livestock industry across the country is under pressure. They need animal fodder and other forms of aid to survive the current season, and the crops are being threatened by heat stress.
The early plantings for those who received a little bit of early rain look fairly average at the moment. They desperately need rain. But the late plantings that, when we got the rain, I think some of the first rain actually fell on the 31st of December. And those plantings are really looking very bad. I think they well below average. And if we don't get rain over this weekend, I think most of those plants might die actually, because they're standing in the dry parts and their roots can't develop. They can't reach any moisture at the moment.
It is expected that communal farmers will be hardest hit by ongoing drought conditions across the country.
What is extremely important is that in terms of a prioritization of a country on food production, there needs to be a form of a buffer or assistance in times of emergencies. And we see this drought again as a national emergency because it has impact. It's going to have an impact directly on consumer prices. It's going to have an impact on food affordability. It has an impact on the farmers on the land. The main problem is cash flow.
Agri SA says it will be approaching different banks and the government to help raise money. The farming community is deeply concerned that if financial aid is not in place, at least by the beginning of winter, then they will have a real crisis in their hands.
The grain sector is in a lot worse financial situation than it was, and our ability to absorb this current drought is really under a lot of pressure. And the grain farmers are desperately looking for assistance.
Agri SA says South Africa's presidency is already attending to this issue.
We really need to sort this out if we want to feed our nation and Southern Africa going forward, and put constructive plans in place. So what we've done is we are part of a presidential panel where we are reporting to the president on how we're going to take agriculture forward.
Many farmers are already considering retrenching permanent workers, while many commercial farmers had also reported suffering from depression or anxiety due to these on-farm pressures. Yolisa Njumela for CGTN, Centurion, South Africa.
Well, to get more on this story, we are now joined by Wessel Lemmer. He is a senior agriculture economist for Absa Bank. Thank you very much for joining us. South Africa's agricultural industry body, Agri-SA, will approach stakeholders to raise close to $220 million to help farmers hit by the severe drought. How bad would you say the situation is?
Good evening. Well, I think for certain areas in South Africa it's pretty bad. If you just to put it in perspective, we normally plant about 2.5 million hectares of maize. Due to the late rains, and we received in most of our production regions in the maize producer regions, about only half of that rainfall by the end of December, and it's actually during October to December that the crop needs to be planted. So we saw a huge decline in plantings. It's about, we expect it will be 1.9 million hectares compared to the 2.5 million hectares. And then you also need to have a yield. So only if you have a long-term average yield, you will reach about 9.2 million tons. Now we need in South Africa about 11 million tons, and if that's the case, we need to import about 1.1 million tons of yellow maize and white maize, especially yellow maize. Now, to put that in perspective, if you look over a year from now, a year ago, maize prices increased by 40%. Our beef carcass prices, due to this foot and mouth disease event that we had, declined by 10%, and the result is that the wiener calf prices dropped by 30% the last month. Now you can see for a farmer that's diversified, with wiener calf prices being down by 30%, maize prices up by 40% to a year ago, the farmer that's not going to have a harvest is not going to get that price, that good price, and he can't also fall back on the beef and the cattle prices, because cattle prices, wiener calf prices dropped by 30%. Now I can see that there's farmers out there that are really in a predicament, which is not good. So that is the situation, to put it in perspective.
And what has caused all this severe drought? What kind of an impact is it going to have on consumers?
Well, you can imagine if our maize and the production of maize is a staple in South Africa, so the lower income group are going to be impacted by the increase of maize prices by 40%. Back in 2015-16, when we saw these increase in prices, food inflation skyrocketed to above 9-10%. So you can just imagine what the impact will be on the lower income consumer. So it can be quite severe. On the other hand, you also see that the price of wiener calves dropped, and also carcass prices. Our feedlots come under pressure because with the higher prices for maize and feed, you will have to, you can't up your carcass prices because the consumer in South Africa, our economy is too weak, and then you have the wiener calf prices that drop. So for consumers on the lower income side, at the moment prices and maize meal prices are fairly stable, and it didn't reflect yet, the higher commodity prices didn't reflect yet in the food prices, but we can expect that going forward for the next 3 months, especially until July, that we may see quite a significant increase in food price inflation, and that will have a direct impact on the consumer.
Okay, thank you very much for your analysis. That was Wessel Lemmer there, Senior Agriculture Economist for Absa Bank. Moving on to other news now. To matters in South Sudan, and the body set up by the African Union to monitor implementation of the peace deal, the RJMEC, has urged all parties to prioritise the unification of their armed forces. This is ahead of the scheduled formation of a unity government this May. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
Number 4.
The revitalized Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, or RJMEC, is tasked with assessing whether South Sudan's peace deal is actually being implemented, and it says the biggest challenge now is reforming the security sector.
It is very important that all the armed forces of South Sudan are unified. With the rapid approach of the transitional period, their unification will be a decisive milestone for this agreement, which is why no effort should be spared in achieving this.
The peace deal provides for the formation of a unity government by May this year. However, the parties to the peace deal say there aren't yet enough funds available to push the process forward, and they are urging the international community for help.
We are tasked to also find office premises, accommodation, and staffing for the vice presidents, starting with the first VP and maybe 2 other VPs, they need to be attended to. That one is also a task to be carried out. We have also to find premises, accommodation and staffing for the new 5 ministries.
The international community is, however, saying it wants to see better management of resources by South Sudan's government before they can put in more money. They are also asking for transparency over how Juba is spending the money it earns from the sale of the country's crude oil. Another challenge is that there are some armed groups still fighting South Sudan's government. Juba says it's open to negotiations with those holdout factions.
We are in peace. We don't want to mention names, but you can agree with me, who are still fighting, you know them. And so if you have a contact, because they are very sympathetic with you, talk to them that the peace has come to the country. Help us with your best language, that please persuade them.
There are also new reports of alleged rape in Bentiu in the northern part of the country by armed men. The government says it will investigate. South Sudan's government says it needs up to $60 million for security sector reforms alone, and experts say post-war reconstruction funds will also have to be found to build the livelihoods of South Sudanese people in order for a lasting peace to return to the country. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
In Nigeria, the clock is ticking towards the 19th of February general elections. Candidates are wooing voters as they race against time. Opposition leader Atiku Abubakar has been in Kaduna State to sell his agenda. Atiku has emerged as the biggest challenger to incumbent President Muhammadu Buhari in what analysts say will be a 2-horse race.
Atiku Abubakar's arrival in the capital of Kaduna State sought to assure residents of this restive northern region that he means well.
Now I want to ask you people the truth. How many of you here will vote for PDP? People of Kaduna. What I'm begging you of is, when you go to vote on election day, from the bottom to the top, vote for PDP. Vote for PDP.
It is a state that has gained the reputation as the seat of violence. Violence that continues to pose a challenge to successive governments of Nigeria. Maiduguri happens to be the epicenter of Boko Haram's frequent attacks, while Kano witnesses frequent blasphemy-related violence. However, Kaduna could be the melting pot of both sectarian and communal conflicts, mostly between herders and farmers. This has resulted in many deaths and displacements. In his campaign, Atiku Abubakar is seeking to assure residents of this northern region that his government will be different.
If you vote in PDP, we assure you of a bright future. We shall help you with a good job and a good life. These are the things we promise you.
Atiku, who is a former vice president and governor, has emerged as a formidable opponent of President Muhammadu Buhari, and his PDP party is vowing to unseat the current president.
I want to say this to you all. Buhari must go. Buhari must go. Buhari must go. APC must go.
Nigeria goes to the polls on February 19th. This is an eagerly awaited election both at home and away, for it might be full of surprises. Just like the 2015 one, in which then incumbent Goodluck Jonathan lost to an opposition candidate. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
Let's now go to Rama. He's got all the business news for us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Here's what's coming up in business. South African farmers are pleading for financial assistance in order to deal with the effects of a nasty drought. And unions in Nigeria have rejected the government's new minimum wage offer of $75 a month.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects
to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Now, South African farmers are warning of a brewing crisis as persistent dryness and very hot weather is threatening crops and livestock alike. According to the lobby group Grain SA, as little as 60% of the available land was planted this season, and those crops that are in the field now are being threatened by heat stress. The country will need to import yellow corn, and there's a possibility it will have shortages of the staple white variety, despite a large carryover of stock from last season. Now, farmers still are yet to recover from the brutal 2015-2016 season when the country grappled with the worst drought on record. The Agricultural Business Chamber is in talks with government, banks and businesses alike about support measures for the industry. A December survey showed that 31,000 jobs and over $510 million in potential revenue had been lost as a direct result of this drought. We're still in South Africa, where experts appointed to review operations of the country's power utility Eskom have proposed that it should be split. Now, the team hired to develop a plan to turn around this ailing power company want to divide it effectively into 3 separate companies. Media reports are saying the recommendations will be handed over to President Cyril Ramaphosa next week. Reforming Eskom is absolutely vital as part of efforts to get Africa's most industrialized economy running at full tilt. The power utility supplies more than 90% of the country's electricity, but it is drowning in debt, over $30 billion of it. A senior ANC official briefed on the task team's work said to propose what essentially is a functional unbundling of Eskom. Now, in non-jargony terms, that basically involves separating it into entities responsible for power generation, distribution and transmission. Ramaphosa's task team also agrees that Eskom needs another government bailout if it is to survive. Some company results for you. In Kenya, East African Breweries has registered a 33% growth in half-year earnings. The number you're looking at is $65.5 million. Now, that's been driven by relatively strong performance across all segments and the markets it operated in the region. The Brewers Group revenues are up 13% to $412 million. The revenue was driven by strong performances from mainstream spirits, bottled beer, and of course the firm's famous Senator Keg brand across the region. The half-year numbers essentially mean that EABL has achieved 91% of the profit it attained in full-year results for the year ending in June 2018, placing it on a very strong footing going into the 2019 fiscal year. Over in West Africa, Nigeria's national minimum wage fight is far from over. In fact, things may actually be about to get a lot worse because labor unions are threatening more industrial action over the decision by the country's Council of State to peg the newly proposed minimum wage at about 27,000 naira. That translates to about $75 a month. The unions, however, are asking for 30,000 naira per month. That's about $83. With the details, here's CGTN's Teji Batmos.
It is certainly not what the labor unions had expected. Before now, they had all thought all that was left to be done over the minimum wage dispute was for the government to transmit a bill to Parliament confirming 30,000 naira or $83 as the new national minimum wage. But it was something different that emerged after the Council of State meeting, the highest organ of government in the country, comprising the President, the Vice President, Senate President, Speaker of the House of Representatives and 36 state governors, as well as former presidents of the country.
27,000 is the benchmark that the lowest paid worker will get. States or organizations that are able to pay more than 27,000 could do so. It depends on the financial capacity. For example, the federal government has resolved that their own workers will not get anything less than 30,000, the least paid federal government worker.
The figure is 3,000 naira short of the 30,000 naira being demanded by labor unions in the country and agreed by a tripartite committee set up by the federal government. The unions have rejected the offer and have called an emergency meeting for Friday to decide on their next move. But the secretary of the Nigeria Labour Congress, the largest workers' union in the country, has given a hint of what is to come. He said, quote, "Workers should not be held responsible for any development after our next meeting on Friday," end of quote.
It is funny that a government would attempt to set a minimum wage 30,000 naira and 27,000 naira. If you segregate minimum wage, then it's no longer a national minimum wage. So you are setting one for public sector and setting one for private sector. You are setting one for federal government. You are setting one for state government. It is no longer a national minimum wage.
The National Council of States that made this recommendation has no legal or constitutional role to play in the process of setting a national minimum wage. So it is a needless crisis that has come into what has been a very painstaking process. And if the labor movement decides to go on strike or take any actions that disrupt everything that has been done, they really will not be blamed.
The government says it will now send a new national minimum wage bill of 27,000 naira or $75 to Parliament for passage into law, and that there will be a review of the wage law every 5 years. Everyone is now waiting for the union's announcement after the emergency meeting on Friday. It certainly won't be anything palatable to the government. Deji Badmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Bit of alarming news for the coffee lovers among us. New research is showing that more than half of wild coffee species, a big chunk of which are grown here in East Africa, are at risk of extinction because of climate change. Now, that study was done by scientists from the UK's Royal Botanical Gardens, and it revealed that the danger facing these wild coffee species is extremely high. And that in turn is causing worry among farmers in Uganda, which is one of Africa's top coffee producers. CGTN's Isabel Nakiria filed this report.
A bad coffee harvest, hundreds of Arabica trees withering away to the coffee wilt disease. Farmers blame it on the unpredictable changes in weather.
2-degree rise in temperature really affects all the coffee types, but more particularly for Arabica that has always been used to cold environments. Therefore, Arabica is more susceptible and it becomes an endangered, species.
Scientists say that some of the Arabica wild coffee species are at high risk. The threat against the crop includes drought and deforestation. Farmers are concerned that production could go down.
And this is why we need to have irrigation as another measure that just in case, but also to supplement, because we have had this with us. Dry spells, continue to occur even when it rains these days. So really it is a cause to worry.
Uganda is the birthplace of Robusta coffee, but also grows Arabica. And according to the Meteorological Department, rains are now falling at the wrong time and coffee beans have less time to mature.
The weather is changing because like when we look at the current, looking at January last year, we can see that it was not as wet as today. But this year, January, it is wet. So that one we call it variation of the weather. People sometimes they call it climate change.
Figures from the Coffee Development Authority show that more than 1.7 million households grow coffee, making it Uganda's #1 agricultural export. Ugandan farmers are being urged to grow trees on their farms to protect their coffee and new varieties that can withstand harsh temperatures. The Coffee Authority says this could improve yields and eventually boost production. But if this does not happen, then thousands of farmers and one of the world's most loved drinks could go out of business. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
A Women's Economic Forum recently took place in Tunisia's capital. The event's focus was on promoting investments by women for women. Now, the forum comes as several Tunisian women continue to excel as entrepreneurs, but they still lack the recognition and financial support they need to thrive in the country. CGTN's Adin Chachi has the details.
Participants in the 22nd Global Edition of the Women Economic Forum agreed that funding, capacity building and access to markets are key factors to ensure women's empowerment.
The forum gathers over 100 participants from 23 countries. It aims to boost dialogue and trade between women in all fields and establish the basis of women's networks in the entire world so as to create investment opportunities and enhance women's economic empowerment.
Recounting their experiences, female entrepreneurs and officials of financial institutions and associations attending the forum said access to funding remains a handicap for several women seeking to launch their own businesses.
Funding is a main challenge facing any woman entrepreneur. She could have a great idea, but it will not see light unless banks and financial institutions are involved in the process. The role of state institutions and the private sector is to facilitate funding and to give guarantees on behalf of women entrepreneurs.
The founder and global chairperson of All Ladies League and Women Economic Forum in India said that Tunisia has the legal framework to become an international hub for women empowerment.
If you have the political vision and you have the political will, I think you have everything, all advantages to turn Tunisia into a hub for trade, for culture, for tourism, for Europe, for Africa, for the Arab region, and why not invite the Asian countries as well.
The Tunisian government has implemented an ambitious strategy aiming to reduce social and economic gaps in order to build rural women's capacities. Draft laws are underway to promote the economic empowerment of women and to get them out of the early agricultural work spectrum. Since 2016, when the Female Economic Initiative program began, 2,300 women's projects have been funded with a budget of about $5 million in different economic sectors such as industry, agriculture, services, trade and handicrafts. The number of these projects is expected to reach 8,000 in 2020. Adin Chachi, CGTN, Tunis.
All right, and I'll leave it there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. We'll be going to South Africa. We'll be taking a look at the effects of this drought conditions the South African farmers have had to deal with. 31,000 jobs lost, $510 million and counting in potential revenue also down the drain. How can this situation be salvaged? Some answers coming your way at 1800 GMT. For now, though, back to Karen.
Thank you very much, Rama. Well, we are going to a short break. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including an event in Burkina Faso seeks to encourage self-expression among young people. And in South Africa, Cape Premier yearling attracts buyers from different countries.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's head to Venezuela, where a crisis deepens after opposition leader Juan Guaidó declared himself president. He has support from the United States. He's now considering a request for funds from international institutions, including the IMF, to finance his interim government. Washington has ordered all non-essential embassy staff to leave Venezuela, but it won't follow the Venezuelan president's demand for the US to pull out all personnel. Violence continues to rock the South American country, with 26 people reportedly killed this week. Speaking in Caracas, President Nicolás Maduro delivered a passionate speech blaming the US and economic warfare. He said all Venezuelan diplomats would be withdrawn from the United States. In Burkina Faso, young Burkinabe artists have organised an art exhibition at the National Museum in the capital, Ouagadougou. The event seeks to provide a platform for young artists.
About 36 artworks made of batik, bronze and paintings were exhibited to the general public at the Musée National de Ouagadougou. The artworks exhibited address various themes such as peace and social cohesion.
This represents the I in English or the je in French. This is the letter L and then the letter Y. Together, the three letters read, I love you. A deaf person who makes this sign to you is simply to tell you that they love you. Why did I decide to work in sign language? It is a way for me to promote sign language, which is not very well known to the Burkinabe public.
The exhibition is an initiative of the Regional Directorate of Culture of the Centre Region of Burkina Faso.
Our expectations, of course, is to renew contact or to reconcile with our audience, with our brothers and sisters, because generally here in Africa, when we talk about works of art, we have the impression that only the West is interested, forgetting that we ourselves can also have the possibility of consuming our own products.
Through this event, the initiators hope to popularize art in Burkina Faso and attract large numbers to the skill.
It is this painting on civility or incivility that impressed me a lot, because that is the problem we are currently facing in my country. And if you look very carefully, it is well written, urinating prohibited. But you see that there is a grown-up person urinating anyway. So it is a really deplorable phenomenon that we are experiencing not only in Burkina Faso, but also in Africa.
According to plastic artists in Burkina Faso, the promotion of culture is vital for the sector's stakeholders. Crafts in Burkina Faso contribute 30% to the gross domestic product. Norma Kugu, CGTN.
The annual Cape Premier Yearling Sale is underway in South Africa's mother city. Some of the country's finest thoroughbred horses are going under the hammer. The auction is the largest annual sale for the country's pre-race calendar, which not only attracts rising stars, but also unpolished racehorses. As CGTN's Travis Andrews reports, the sale has attracted some international buyers with wallets fat enough to buy future racing champions.
Every year, the Premier Yearling Sale holds a prize auction for the country's best thoroughbred horses, and the expectation of quality is always high. This year proved no exception, with a number of prize fillies on sale, some with bloodlines that have conquered racing competitions in South Africa, Dubai and Hong Kong. This year saw an exchange rate that favoured buyers, with around 216 horses for the picking.
We'd be aiming for an average of around $40,000 US, 40 to 50,000 US dollars would be an exceptionally good result. The sales record to date is 6 million rand, which equates to a little over $400,000. So that really does put into perspective, what incredibly good value from an international perspective you get at the sale.
Over 60 international buyers participated at this year's sale, as well as jockeys and local trainers, who will get the opportunity to give each horse a closer look before the auction kicks off. Most of the yearlings also come from local stud farms and have bloodlines that regularly compete on the racing scene. While yearlings at the top end of the market continue to rake in the highest prices, it is the middle segment which continues to hold the greatest value.
I believe 2018 average was up from 2017, so hopefully the trend continues. I mean, I like to follow the average price, but it's also relevant to look at the medians as well. And there's a big category, I think, of probably between the 300 to 800 that where probably the most of them are going to go through.
The sale, though, does offer indications of just how well the local economy is doing, and there does seem to be encouraging signs that buyers are not holding back in their pursuit of their ambitions of being an owner of a future race champion. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Well, we have all the sports news coming up after the break.